welcome to Not Just Ads, and welcome to Tony Katsur, CEO of the IAB Tech Lab. Welcome, Tony. And let me start.
Alessandro, thank you for having me.
Let me start with an analogy, a perception. If I had to describe the IAB Tech Lab to the men in the street, I would say that the digital advertising industry is separated in factions, in different sides. Very often they have conflicting business models. Very often they are trying to pull one side versus the other. And then the adult in the room comes in, it's the IAB Tech Lab, and everybody shuts up and listens. Is this a good description?
I mean, I don't know if we're the adult in the room. I don't know, and I don't know if everyone shuts up and listens. I think our role is to bring open technical standards, open technical frameworks in the form of open source initiatives, guidelines, technical and operational best practices in order to drive growth in the digital ad economy, find efficiencies, and therefore drive additional profitability in the digital ad economy and mitigate risk. That's our job. And we do it from a technical standards perspective. That's our role. Like if that's us being the adult in the room, sure. I don't know if everyone shuts up and listens, because one of our biggest challenges is adoption. There are many standards that we have released that are some are poorly adopted, some are much better adopted than others, and it's about understanding the motivations of all of our constituents, and that includes ad tech companies, publishers and media companies, agencies, and brands. Like we work with the entire ecosystem globally. So whether they shut up and listen and actually adopt our standards is a whole different matter. What we don't do is we don't get involved in matters of public policy, governance, business requirements. That's the remit of the IABs globally, whether it's IAB US, whether it's IAB Italy or IAB Spain or IAB UK, IAB Australia. We defer to them to solve for the business issues, the public policy issues, working day to day with government regulators on areas of privacy, things of that nature. Our job is to come in and then support those policy issues through technical standards and frameworks. That's our job.
Sure. And it was half a joke, but I really perceive the respect and the reputation of the IAB Tech Lab, unlike many other
Thank you.
In the industry. And let me move to big rivalries. So you have Lakers versus Celtics, Real Madrid versus FC Barcelona, Coke versus Pepsi. So are you ID or are you ID-less? Which sides are you on?
There's not a side.
I'm just teasing you. I'm just teasing you. But I think it's very interesting that you have embraced and you brought in more clarity on ID-less as well. So it would be interesting to hear your perspective.
Well, I think the industry is going to pursue both of those paths. Whether it's due to the machinations of big tech, the work that Safari has done and Chrome to effectively squelch the use of identifiers across the open web and the browser environments, that's where things like ID-less solutions come in. Or whether it's complying with privacy regulations, that's where things like ID-less may come in. However, there is still a place for IDs or tokens, in this case, to be able to identify a household or a device or a user. I think it really depends on, the data that's involved. Do you have scaled, robust, rich first-party data that you can tie to an ID, provided again you have achieved all the privacy permissions that a local jurisdiction requires with consumers? Then appending that to an ID is perfectly fine. If you don't have that, do you do something that is ID-less to better support an environment you're operating in? Take Safari. Like Safari is largely ID-less at this point. So I think it varies by the environment that the publisher and the advertiser are operating in. I think it depends on local law in terms of what's required. And I think it depends on the scale and richness or robustness of the data sets you may be working with. So our job is to give the industry optionality to leverage both ID-based or token-based solutions as well as ID-less solutions. I do think on a wide trajectory over the next, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, I do think we see the industry move more towards not ID-less per se, but more of a large cohort lookalike model approach that cohort may have an identifier appended to the entire cohort, but that cohort could consist of 10,000 consumers, right? I think that's where the industry likely moves over the next, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, because you've now taken a wide swath of consumers and put them into a cohort of, I don't know, new home buyers, right? New homeowners. And you have effectively de-identified them on an individual basis, have commingled all of that. That in and of itself is somewhat privacy preserving. Is it perfect? No, but will we ever have perfect privacy? I don't think we will. So that's where I see the industry going. I think that's more of an ID based solution. However, other environments where IDs are not permitted whatsoever, that's where you need things like ID-less solutions.
Sure, and this also ties nicely with the fingerprinting being admitted into the Google's world. There are conflicting opinions. The ICO said it's irresponsible. I've read somehow you said it's a positive further tool in the range of options. How do you see that playing out?
I think there was a big leap from what Google announced versus how it was how it was interpreted by many parties, not just the ICO. And I do want to say I have tremendous respect for the work that the ICO does. Candidly, I think they're one of the more advanced regulators in the globe in terms of finger on the pulse around privacy and technical approaches to addressability for digital advertising and maintaining privacy. However, I do think a lot of the industry and even some regulators made this leap that because Google is going to allow IP address targeting in their stack, that suddenly you're fingerprinting. You don't need an IP address to fingerprint. There is plenty of other signaling in the ecosystem to create enough surface area to build a fingerprint. If you just take fundamental concepts within data science with enough entropy, so if I see enough data around a certain device or a household enough times, that gives me enough to establish a fingerprint. IP address doesn't have to be involved. So the Google announcement I thought was a positive because a lot of CTV advertising is targeted based on the IP address. That's how things like reach and frequency are managed by the streaming platforms. Now, if I'm a consumer and I'm watching a program that is ad supported and streaming that, I don't want to see the same ad for the same brand, a dozen times or more than a dozen times in an hour-long programming. That's a terrible advertising experience. I'm still going to get ads, right? Television is largely ad supported, no different than streaming. Being able to target IP address, particularly in CTV, allows those platforms to manage the frequency of those ads, which leads to a better consumer experience related to the advertising. So I think it was a net positive. It was somehow conflated into Google's allowing fingerprinting. And I'm not sure how we got to that because I don't need an IP address to fingerprint. Can I fingerprint off an IP address? Sure. Can I fingerprint off of other signaling? Again, if I see that signal enough, that creates enough surface area for me to actually start to fingerprint someone or a device or a household. So there was this big leap of like IP address targeting somehow enables fingerprinting, and I think that's an incorrect leap by many.
From my personal perspective is that in good hands, it might be an improvement. In bad hands, well, we know already in the average will somehow, the possibility of still getting away with certain approaches will slow down the real transformation. But then again, it's not on your shoulders. Adoption, you can recommend, you cannot force adoption or behaviors.
No, we can't. We're not the internet police. I've said this multiple times. We, every industry has bad actors. Every single one. Finance, energy, healthcare, you name it. Our industry has bad actors. Bad actors will be outed. Bad actors will be punished. Bad actors should be fined. Bad actors, if you're violating an agreement you have with another partner, and there are some recent examples in the industry about this, then yeah, you should be singled out, and there should be penalties for bad behavior. We're not the only industry that has bad behavior. I cannot, as Tech Lab, nor can any trade organization necessarily enforce how a protocol is used, enforce how RTB is leveraged. We cannot enforce, how VAST is used. Like, we don't even have the technical monitoring capabilities to do that. Number one, and two, it's not in our remit. We also don't have necessarily, we don't have the power to force how things are used. But bad actors will get singled out, and they will continue to get singled out, and eventually driven from the industry, which is a good thing. So we don't have the ability to kind of force how things are used.
Absolutely. No, I was just reflecting on the fact that others that are not bad actors, but not necessarily at the forefront, will delay the necessary changes. But that's
Absolutely.
a long conversation. And I'm jumping because I have a lot of interesting things to ask you. So I'm jumping from one topic to another. And I love the idea of curation. I don't think that curation is the ideal approach for media owners. I think that the ideal for media owners is an own and operated media alliance that they will manage and control. But that's another story. Curated marketplaces are still a very good step in the right direction. So you moved from seller-defined audiences to curated audiences. Do you see the improvement of the control of media owners? So can it truly bring a more a tighter relationship between buyers and sellers?
Well, it's a great question. Changing the name of a product doesn't instantly unlock success for the product. We have struggled in getting seller defined audiences adopted for the past several years, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think we misnamed it, right? Because in speaking with the buy side, in speaking with agencies and brands, the conversation was, well, why should the seller define the audience? I wanted to define the audience, or I want to do it in partnership with the seller. Like, let's agree on what an audience is. So picking up on the curation craze, the recent curation craze, we decided to rebrand it as curated audiences. However, the other challenges that we have witnessed in the industry, and this is again speaking with the ecosystem, is that there is still quite a bit of cookie-based inventory out there for buyers to buy, and I think that's why you're seeing slow adoption of alternative forms of addressability, whether it be curated audiences or whether it be other third-party identity resolution solutions or synthetic IDs or fingerprinting. I think you've seen some slow adoption there because the industry is still awash in the third-party cookie. I mean, Chrome represents roughly 67% of global browser market share, and the third-party cookie is still alive and well there. So I think that's one of the. I think those are two reasons we've seen slow adoption of things like seller-defined audiences, now curated audiences. I do like the curation kind of craze right now. Again, even though we've had frameworks in place to support curation for 2.5, almost 3 years, what I do like about it is that I think it does put a bit more control on the sell side. Again, you can curate an audience in partnership with a buyer. Like, tell me what you're looking for, and I'll curate it based on my audience data and my content. If those are the two things that you can use to curate, I also think it creates efficiencies in the bid stream, right? So if I've curated an audience and I then map that to a deal ID and send that out via a PMP, there is already explicit agreement between a buyer and seller is whenever you see this impression opportunity, it represents this audience that we curated with you, right? Or that we curated for you. I think that leads to a more efficient bid stream, which again leads to lower QPS, which leads to lower costs and lower carbon emissions, right? You're processing less QPS. So I think there are holistic benefits to curation, without a doubt. I would like to see the industry move more in that direction, because I think it also creates a more explicit conversation between buyer and seller. What audience are you looking for in what context? Okay, we can curate that for you. Do you agree on these data points? The other issue around curation is this issue of data provenance. Like, what signal went into defining that? Context is pretty straightforward, but what signal went into defining the audience? And that's where data provenance matters. I do think we have a data quality issue here. So data provenance, for listeners, is just what were the ingredients? No different than a nutrition label when you buy something at a grocery store. What are the ingredients that went into that definition of the audience? What are the ingredients that went into that token or that identifier? How recent is it? Recency is a huge issue around data quality. Like, I was a new homeowner 6 years ago. I'm not a new homeowner anymore. Like, has that data been refreshed? So this concept of data provenance, I think, is directly tied to curation, because I think we do have a data quality issue in our ecosystem where there's a lot of data out there that's just not good. It's just not sound data, or it's old data, or it's not accurate data. So I think all that ties into this curation craze. We're immensely supportive of it, which is why we're standing up the curation sub-working group as part of the programmatic supply chain working group, which is being led by Hillary Slattery here at the Tech Lab, because I think this is a lean-in opportunity for us.
I wrote like a couple of years ago about the idea of digital advertising splitting, basically tier 1 quality, tier 2 everybody else. Do you think that this is one step towards that kind of vision?
Oh, I haven't thought about it that way. Well, I think there's always going to be, or historically, there has always been there's always been the premium element of your buy, and then there's always been the tonnage element. And tonnage doesn't necessarily reflect poor quality or a poor environment, but there are obvious premium brands out there, right? Vogue is a premium media brand, right? Like, that is a premium media brand. You're going to pay more. You're going to pay more or differently for Vogue or the New York Times than a mid to long tail, typically a mid to long tail publication. There are exceptions to that, right? Some people, The Economist, an incredibly premium brand that, if you look at their audience volume, they're a mid-tail publisher, but an amazingly, incredibly premium brand. I'm a loyal Economist subscriber. So I think there's always been this kind of premium tier and then more of a tonnage tier where you're buying the mid and the long tail. I think that's always existed. Curation may further delineate that. I actually think curation is a greater opportunity for the mid and long tail than necessarily it is for, I'm not saying it's not an opportunity for the major brands, but again, going back to my example, like, the New York Times is the New York Times, right? Vogue
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
Vogue. Like those brands have cachet, right? Where, again, you're mid and long tail, and this isn't an insult to mid and long tail, like, but you're not Vogue. So I think there's a great opportunity for curation at the mid and long tail. I think it's a huge opportunity for the mid and long tail to be able to pool their content together into a curated deal for buyers to buy it, because it also simplifies the buying process across the mid and long tail, which is great for the mid and long tail.
Well, Tony, you updated my vision. Now we have a tier 3. So the tier 2 is the curation, and the tier 3 is everybody else.
Oh, just open web buying?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, if you look at the data that's been published, open web buying, year over year continues to shrink, and we have been seeing more curation. I mean, the first phase of curate. I mean, the early days of curation were the ad networks, right? The first ad networks. Remove the negative connotations of arbitrage and hidden margin, etc. But with the advent of the deal ID, the PMP, like that was really your first form of programmatic curation. So again, curation isn't new; it's just evolving um, because the deal ID has been around now for over 10 years now. I think the deal ID has been around for 11 years at this point. So
Wow.
curation's been around for at least 11 years, right, with the deal ID. And one could argue, the first generation, second generation ad networks were curating buys based on content and audience. Um, I think there was certainly some position taking and some arbitrage going on, and I think that's why ad networks kind of leave a bad taste in people's mouth. But I think today's next generation ad networks are much more transparent, but they're still curating. They're still curating supply. So open web has always been, part of the buy. I don't think open web goes away entirely, but we've seen every year open web buying has been shrinking as a percentage of the media buy.
And I've seen the IAB Tech Lab Roadmap 2025, which I loved. I think it's very comprehensive. And one thing I truly loved, which is I need to read it because otherwise I will miss. Say AI market research content ingestion, which is basically supporting media owners to in their protection of the IP versus AI platforms using their content for model training.
Yeah, so this is one of those initiatives where my goal since I started at the Tech Lab, and I really want to put an exclamation point on it in 2025, is to activate the lab within Tech Lab, right? So a laboratory is where you experiment, you try new things. Some experiments fail, some experiments succeed. This is going to be one of those things where we're activating the lab in Tech Lab. And the concept is relatively simple, and it's less, I think, of a technical hurdle and more, I think, of a business development and coalition building hurdle with publishers. This concept that we're calling the LLM Ingest API would be standing up an open API or a framework for APIs by which publishers push the LLM engines, the open AIs, the Perplexities, Google and Gemini stack, Bing's AI solution, rather than crawl, they get pushed to this API by which their content feed, they can actually then pull the content feed and they can get Delta updates. They can update their RAG models through this. There's the initial crawl, and then AI typically follows up with their RAG updates to effectively clean up, um, or update the content. Rather than crawl, force the AI partners to this API that publishers then control, and effectively blacklist the IP blocks of all the crawlers and be like, this is how access my content. So it gives publishers explicit control over who can access their content and how it's accessed and what they'll share with them, right? Because you could even permission out or create tiers of content feeds within this API that the LLMs could then have access to. So that's step one. Step two would be, is there then an opportunity to introduce some form of ad call within that API feed, by which the publisher says, okay, you can have this content, but what's coming along with that is an ad call that I sell against. So the publisher still controls the advertising model within the AI platform. I will give you a very, very simple, fundamental example. If I go into ChatGPT, let's say in the future, this would be our goal. I go into ChatGPT and say, give me a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, right? ChatGPT then, gives me the recipe for chocolate chip cookies, and let's just say hypothetically that recipe came from All Recipes, right? Dotdash Meredith owned company, came from All Recipes. So this chocolate chip cookie recipe brought to you by allrecipes.com, sponsored by Toll House. That ad should be sold by All Recipes, and then that comes along with the actual feed itself. That's our vision for this. And again, this is about activating the lab in Tech Lab. We're going to experiment with this. We're going to see if there's appetite for this. We're going to do market research with publishers on this. It's less of a technical issue. I think we can stand something like this up in a relatively short amount of time. It's then getting major publishers to sign up for this approach and then have the conversation with the LLMs of, this is how you're going to access my content moving forward. I'm going to have an ad feed injected into my content feed to you. That is my ad sale. Maybe there's, the business issues would have to be worked out. Maybe there's some reverse revenue split where the publisher says, okay, you get X% of my ad sales against the content that I provide to you. That's our vision for this. So we're still fleshing it out technically. We're in early conversations with some publishers around this conceptually, but I think it is paramount on us as an industry to protect publisher IP, and that is their content. And frankly, they have been pillaged by a lot of these AI engines over the past several years at no benefit whatsoever to the publishers. So that's something we need to try and solve. So it's a combination of technical as well as business development and building this coalition where publishers say, yeah, this is the way I want to do it moving forward.
I truly love it. And I thought when I heard of it for the first time, I thought this really shows leadership. And I had the question ready, but are you moving away from advertising then? No, you explained. I think, no, absolutely. And I would have loved it anyway. But I think it would put responsibility on publishers on the quality of ads that they push along then which is a good pressure to have, and hopefully raise the quality of the overall dynamic. Transparency, I think, transparency is on the rise on traditional media, traditional display. A great job has been done. A lot of battles have been fought. In terms of CTV and retail media, sometimes I have the feeling that the bad actors are being progressively flushed out of traditional media and traditional display. Now they are operating more on CTV and retail media. Is this an accurate description? Is it a natural thing to happen where new channels are growing, new opportunities, and that's where the money is? Also, the bad guys go?
Fraud always follows the richest unit economics and the biggest budgets, and that's television. And as television budgets shift over to streaming environments, fraud will follow. Now, I firmly believe that fraud remains a problem even in legacy digital channels like display and the mobile app world. I think fraud still goes on there. How much? It depends on who you talk to. However, I do think there are definitely fraud risks in the CTV ecosystem that need to be addressed. Again, they are the biggest budgets, they are the richest unit economics, and that is where the fraudsters will go. So one of the things that we, as part of our ads.cert initiative, which is kind of our cryptographic approach to solving for fraud or creating greater barriers. I shouldn't say solving for fraud. Fraud will always be a nuclear arms race. Always. It'll be between the industry and the fraudsters. However, things like our ads.cert initiative, one of the things we're seeking to introduce is this form of device attestation that effectively verifies, like, devices are effectively signing the impression opportunity. So it's a valid impression opportunity. The goal there is to prevent, the the wall of of mobile phones emulating CTV screens, saying I'm a connected television device when in fact they're not. Things like device attestation as part of ads.cert would create a big barrier for those fraudsters to overcome. So those are things we're working on for the CTV environment. In fact, we're actually talking about this at ALM in Palm Springs in 2 weeks. We actually have a panel talking explicitly about this.
And you are heavily involved in retail media as well. Sometimes I wish that traditional media was more involved in retail media, providing better, higher quality environments for audience extensions, for example. Do you see that happening, or are the worlds separated and will move in that way?
I think eventually it will get there. We're very early. We're in the, to use a baseball analogy, we're in the first inning of what we're calling now commerce media. We don't refer to it as retail media anymore because it's not just retailers. Um, it's United Airlines and Marriott and non-traditional retailers are getting into the commerce media game. I think it's early in this sector. I do think there'll be a flight to better environments as this matures. Like any new industry or subset of an industry, this will mature over the next several years, and I do think you'll see a flight to higher quality environments over the next. I think over the next 3-4 years. I think it's going to happen relatively quickly.
Roadmap for 2025. I'm seeing a lot of topics, but to close this conversation, which is the one-word pick for you for 2025?
One word?
One word, one topic. I'll
One
allow more
topic.
than one word.
If I were to summarize our roadmap, I would say the areas of focus are CTV, addressability, and privacy. Those I think are the three areas that we're heavily focused on.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's been a very interesting deep dive and conversation. I hope to have you here more in the future, and we'll see the progress on all these fields. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Happy to be a repeat guest in the future, and I hope to see you. Hope to see you soon.